Welcome to Command Control Power, the longest-running Apple consulting podcast. For over a decade, we've delivered weekly episodes filled with epic tech support stories, troubleshooting insights, discussions about managing clients and businesses, and interviews with industry colleagues and vendors, all tailored for our pro listeners. We also offer exclusive content through Patreon. This private podcast feed is designed specifically for IT professionals, providing valuable advice and guidance on tackling the more complex aspects of running your practice, working with clients and employees, and managing device fleets. With a modest monthly contribution, you'll gain access to a wealth of advanced Apple expertise, meaningful connections, and a community driven by a shared passion for Apple technology. Visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support to learn more.
Command Control Power is brought to you commercial-free, thanks to the support of our incredible community. We extend a special thank you to our VIP Premier partners: Adigy, the leading Apple device management platform; Tidbits Content Network; Watchman Monitoring; Cirrus Partners; Electrona, the makers of Patch; and our newest VIP partner, Scout IT. We truly appreciate our VIP supporters and all of our patrons for making this show possible. Thank you.
Welcome to another episode of Command Control Power, and happy anniversary to Apple. Happy 50th. Wow.
Look at that.
April 1st, 1776.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
right. Yeah. It's the nation's 250th anniversary this year and Apple's 50th. Pretty wild. April 1st, as we record, that is their official anniversary. Not a joke. That's real. And what can you guys say about this amazing 50th anniversary of the company? To me, it seems like not 50. They've been around forever, right? It's like 50 years doesn't sound like that much.
One of the
I'm
reasons
older than Apple.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I tuned in was I thought David Pogue was going to be here. And if he's not going to be here, this is the only podcast he hasn't appeared on in the last couple of weeks.
Nice.
Advertising his book. So I don't know. You guys probably get the reference. Maybe the listeners don't. David Pogue wrote a terrific book called Apple at 50. And it's got beautiful color pictures in it. And it's almost 600 pages of text. And he goes in deep. And he talks about everything. A highly recommended book. And I think you can get it on Amazon for a huge discount, like $33. It's a hardcover. It's well worth the price.
Bad. Yeah.
No.
Nice. Yeah, good recommendation. I know you said you watched a couple of those podcasts with him, right? There was one that was pretty interesting with like some good storytelling and whatnot.
He did a full interview, including video, which is on YouTube, at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California.
Celebrities were in the audience. They brought on Avi Tevanian. They had Ron Wade in the audience, one of Apple's first investors that went in with Steve and Woz. So I highly recommend that. And we can put that in the show notes, but worth a watch.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds really cool. It's a great occasion just to take a walk down memory road. I think that was the idea of doing a show here to commemorate things. Listeners in the chat, if you're already here joining us, feel free to sound off in the comments with any of your stories. We had maybe a couple of submissions. I put this request out only yesterday, so all of half a day's notice or something. If you feel like contributing, you can send in a little video clip of yourself commenting on what did Apple mean to you over all these years. Mike Kingsley in the chat already has a good question we can throw out to you all and the listeners out there. But what was everyone's first Apple computer? He says his was an Apple IIc. That's a great question. Adam Rice of Ask Adam said the Apple II Plus, and he even has the correct spelling with the brackets there, the opposite facing brackets as Apple
cool.
did it to make Roman numerals. I remember seeing that on those computers in elementary school or whatever when in the computer lab and seeing how Apple typed that. It's pretty neat. What was yours, Sam? What was your first?
I guess maybe Kingsley and I are the same age. I don't know, but mine was also an Apple IIc. My father got it from. We didn't buy it new. Yeah. We got it from somebody and put it on my desk in my room one day.
Nice.
Whoa, what is this? Those situations.
And it's not, this is a new computer, like to replace the old computer. This is better. This is a computer. It's like a 0 to a 1 situation. There's no computer. Now there's a computer. Yeah.
That's a good point.
How did you dive in? Like you just turn it on and see what happens? Do you remember those kinds of early days getting into it?
You know what's funny is I don't remember a lot of like how I played with it that much because I was a big Commodore guy. And I got the Commodore 128 when I was younger as well. And I played some of the games on there. So I'm trying to think back of my early uses of Apple at that age versus coming into it as an adult, which is when I really started to dive in.
Yeah,
you were in it in like elementary school, right?
Yeah. This was when Apple was investing in the school systems. And this was like a really shrewd move this is what the social media companies do now. They hook the kids on the product and then you're like a lifelong addict. That they made me an Apple user because they just, that was the option we had in the classroom. They had a whole room full of, at that point, it was probably mostly Apple II's, I think. And the Apple IIgs was like the newer, cooler one. I can't remember if that had color yet, but it had some like newer features and things. Our first computer at home was like yours, Sam. It was my dad brought it home. It was the guy that worked for him. It was his old computer. It was a hand-me-down of a hand-me-down kind of thing. And I remembered seeing them in school, and then we had one at home, and I didn't really know what I was doing with it, but it had BASIC on it. And probably a friend of mine showed me you could type these commands and it'll do stuff. And it was my first experience with computer programming, BASIC. Probably for a lot of people, it's similar. And you could create a loop very easily. You could say 10 times, do this and repeat. I think it was something along those lines. Or with BASIC, it would go line by line through the program. So if you wanted to have it repeat something, you would say go to. So there'd be like line 1, do this, line 2, do this, line 3, do this. Then like line 4 was go back to line 2 and it would repeat. So the thing that I got it to do is display text on screen, and it would just make a wall of text and keep scrolling infinitely until you pressed escape or however you quit that, shut it down or whatever. I probably didn't know how to quit it with an interrupt command. I think I had to shut down the whole computer. So this was like just figuring it out as I go. Yeah, Adam says 20, go to 10, exactly.
I remember those commands, yeah.
And you would do it by 10, so you wouldn't make line 2, line 3, line 4, because what if you needed to insert a line? So you'd have like line 10, line 20, line 30, and then you had room to insert lines, if I remember correctly. Yeah, Dwayne Moss says the Apple II Plus was his first computer. Adam Rice says the family then had an original Mac and then an SE30, and then his first personal Mac was a 2SI. This is also a great question. What was the first computer you bought for yourself or that you had as your own computer? Do you guys remember that? And Jerry, what was your first experience with all this? We didn't get your answer yet.
As we dive into the show, put this out to the people listening, people watching, if they'd like to come on and join us. I know we have the capabilities to do something like that and share their thoughts on Apple at 50.
Yeah, so I sent out a Dropbox link. You can find it in your email. You can find it in the Command Control Power channel on Slack. You can find it in your Patreon messages. It lets you upload a video, and then I can play the video live.
I'm a little bit older than you guys. I don't know if you've noticed that or not, but I've got a few more years on you. So the whole advent of the Apple II, it didn't pass me by, but it was marketed as a family computer, and it wasn't something that I encountered at work. When I was initially at work, and I started working for my father's business, which was a tool and die company, we had PC compatibles. We had a leading edge computer. And then we had an NEC computer with 2 8-inch floppies that made the most horrible noises when this thing was booting up. It would just go, That was normal back then. Yeah. It would take 20 minutes for this thing to boot up. And we did very simple computer-aided machining on it. And then as things evolved, we never actually did anything like that on a Mac. I probably started buying personal Macs for myself for home. But initially what got me into the Macosphere was I was very interested in music primarily. And there was a computer store in New Haven, not the one we're going to show that was in Hamden, and they had an Amiga. So I believe my dad bought an Amiga and I probably co-opted that. I probably brought that to my house because I was already out of college by this point. And Amiga had a lot of vaporware. They really never got off the ground. But then more people started to do, like, MIDI was the big thing back then. And you could get a Mac and you could get a keyboard and you could start to do MIDI stuff. So I can't even imagine what my first Mac Pro was, but it was a Mac Pro. It was probably one of the plastic body ones that sit on the floor where people have made those into cocktail cabinets. Have you seen those? Yeah. And I remember my dad, he's a lovely guy. He's still around, knock on wood. He's 93 this year. And he bought me a Mac, just a regular Mac all in one. what was it called? Before they did any kind of enhancements, before it was
like
a color
classic or
before it was a color CRT. It was just like black and white. Right. And he was trying to do me a solid when I think he got it for me for my birthday. And this is like I said, I'm an adult, so.
That's like a $10,000 birthday present. This is recently, you said? Or,
no,
or
this is years
original?
ago. Yeah, I don't think the Macs were that much money. The all-in-ones were that much money. We're going to get to the prices in a moment. But and I made him return it because I said, "Oh man, all I do is work with computers during the day, and I don't want to have a Mac at night." Right. But what lit my fire was this ability to do music. And I owned an early copy of Finale, which was a notation program for music. And I believe I started using it that way initially. But then we started to get them in at work. And I texted you a receipt that we went to the computer store in Hamden and we bought a Mac 2VX. And Joe, throw that picture up on the screen if you can.
Here it comes. Yep. Yeah, this is really interesting. Look at the pricing on this bad boy.
Let's set the year, 1989.
Okay, there you go.
And the base price of it wasn't even a VX. It was a 2X with an 80 gig hard drive and 4 megabytes of RAM.
80 meg hard. Is that what you said? 80 meg hard drive.
Oh, I misspoke. I probably said gig. 80 meg hard drive.
That would have been $100,000 back then.
Yeah. No, it didn't exist.
So the base price on that was $5,585.
Yeah. That's serious money.
Wow.
That's Mac Pro pricing right there.
Yeah. And you buy a video card and it's some sort of expansion card and a printer, extended keyboard. And we were out the door for $7,000.
Wow.
Wow. I think you were just going to ask this, Jerry. So the 1989 price of $5,585, the 2026 equivalent would be about $14,730.
Damn.
That's a lot of scratch, as the kids would say.
Yeah. It's a lot of apples.
That's amazing.
Hang and tool and die.
Yeah. $35 for the system prep too. There's probably people out there charging a similar rate these days. But here, $35. Let's say $35.
But you declined the CF Care coverage, it looks like.
Yeah, he declined.
That'd be $92 in 2026. Yeah, not far off, right? For the Mac setup. I think if you go to Apple, they'll do it for $99.
$99,
Yeah.
And so for a little while in the business for the computer-aided manufacturing, we continued. We bought some of the Mac clones. So we bought some power computing computers, mostly price-driven because they were a little bit cheaper. They were supposed to be faster. I remember they had the L2 cache. That was the big selling feature. I only went to one Macworld, and I'm getting our head out of ourselves here, but that was in Boston. And power computing was there. And then, of course, everything started moving away from Mac at that point, because then things started to get really bad in terms of the space. And that's when, right before Steve Jobs almost came over and before they bought Next, Apple was just in the toilet. So everybody switched over to PCs for CAD cam work. Yeah.
Wow. What a fun evolution of this whole industry over our lifetimes. We were all more or less children at the time, whatever your age actually was. This goes back 50 years for Apple and 40 years for us or something. And to watch this industry develop and grow up over time, I want to turn our attention back to some of the comments in the chat, which are really great. Also sharing one of these submissions that we had from Dwayne Moss, a listener and supporter of the show. And I also want to, what I always think about coming from those early days, these stories you're telling and how things have evolved. And one thing that I just find fascinating is the concept of how computer languages have evolved over time. You're talking punch cards before the Apple. You're talking about punch cards in assembly and basic. And so there's also this evolution that's happening in language, like in computer programming languages. Now we're in the era of AI, where you just tell it what you want it to do, and then it just figures out whatever language it's using underneath the hood, it's able to create entire applications for you. We're almost at the point where AI, the killer app of AI, is that it's a meta app, basically. It's whatever app you can imagine, it will become that for you. It will basically create that for you. But if you go back to those early days, people were doing it in their brain and putting it into a punch card that they would feed into a system and then eventually get an answer back and see if it even worked or if there was an error and they have to start over. So just imagine that, how that happened. It's miraculous to me how that part works. But Yeah, going back to the chat here, Adam mentioned that one of his first experiences was they bought the 128K Mac and then upgraded it to 512K, which then it became what's called a fat Mac. You've probably heard that term before, but that was the term of trade with this upgraded Mac with this extra memory, which was all of 0.5 MB. It's like mind blowing, like that we've come so far, even in terms of the evolution of like memory usage and things. This is a great comment I wanted to highlight because this is very similar for me. Actually, I'm not sure. I don't recognize the handle here, but Managing Macs says the Mac Classic first use was HyperCard stacks in school, middle school in the early 90s. Same for me. Being turned on to HyperCard was, oh, wow, this is cool. I can make things. Again, this is what everybody's discovering with AI now is you can make apps. And even people got excited about the web for the same reason and about the iPhone for the same reason. But these had a much higher barrier to entry than even HyperCard back in the day. HyperCard was you can get a stack that someone would copy onto a floppy disk for you and you open it up and it's a thing. It does a thing. It's an application practically, or it could be flashcards to study. It could be a presentation about something to help you learn something. It could be a game. It could be anything you can imagine you could create in HyperCard. And the amazing part, like the web, was it was discoverable. On the web, you can do view source and you could see, oh, I see how they're doing that, or they're calling this library or whatever. HyperCard, you could go in and just view what did they call it? HyperTalk, I think, was the language. And I'm trying to remember what they called you could view the source essentially and see how it did what it was doing. And that's basically how I learned how to program with HyperCard. And that's what created the nerd in me was HyperCard. You could just make computers do what you wanted.
The great thing about HyperCard too was I used to get these pre-made CD-ROMs with shareware on there. And there were these pre-made HyperCard stacks. And that was probably my first glimpse into what they were. They could be highly immersive. Some of these ones that sort of captured your imagination, and it could have been a game and it took you around. And it sounds so primitive and simple, but at the same time, it was incredibly engaging and really drew you in. Joe, you were mentioning that Dwayne had something to share that you...
Yeah. Let's throw this up on the stage here.
I am Dwayne Moss and happy to share some of my memories over the years with Apple. Interestingly enough, Paul McCartney played last night at Apple Park, which would have been a great thing to see. It reminded me of when I was with Apple in the 80s at the sales conference. The first sales conference I went to, we actually had Huey Lewis in the News play right after, I think it was Back to the Future came out. And then after that, the next year at the sales conference, we actually had Grace Slick and Starship play. And awesome. I was right next to the stage watching Grace Slick, which was pretty amazing because there were only about maybe 800, 1,000 people there. So it wasn't like being at a big concert. So it was really cool. But then the other thing that was cool that I got to take part in was when Steve Jobs introduced the iPod at Town Hall. They had a small theater, maybe sat about 200, 300, called Town Hall and aisle 5. But I was there for an executive briefing, which they held directly upstairs. And I had heard the announcement was coming the next day, so I stayed around for an extra day instead of flying back to Chicago right away. And he introduced the iPod, and that was one of the things that finally got Apple on the recovery track.
Yeah.
But amazingly, about 4 months after that, I got laid off for the third time at Apple. I had a weird career I was hired 3 times by Apple and let go 3 times.
Wow, they couldn't decide.
When they asked me back for the 4th time, my wife said no. So it's an interesting company, great company. I would never trade my experience with it.
Right.
Although it was funny when I first took the job, my dad said, "You're giving up your engineering to go work for a hippie company in California." And that was in 1984. So thanks for letting me participate. Bye.
That's really cool. Yeah. Thanks,
Awesome,
Dwayne,
Dwayne.
for sending that in. That's, really awesome. Really cool. Hey, Sam, you and I were out IL 5 there, Infinite Loop, Building 5, the Apple Town Hall. The history in there was almost palpable. They had to point it out. I didn't realize until a couple of the presenters mentioned it. But yeah, that's where the iPod was originally, in that theater.
Yeah.
It's like a small space. And now they do these big grand keynotes and things. But that was where the iPod was released. And yeah, what a momentous occasion.
I love those intimate little theaters that they have there where you feel like you're really part of it when you're there. And I can imagine seeing the iPod announced there is like insane.
Cool. Yeah. Do you think like people knew what was happening in that moment when what did it say? 1,000 songs in your pocket in the early days. Yeah,
that's true.
And Dwayne said that really was a turning point. At that point in time was more or less when I got started in this business before I started my company, right around the iPod was when I was starting in this field, working for an Apple specialist. And everybody back then called it like the iPod company, the iPod store. It's like Apple. They don't care who makes it. It's just the iPod. Everybody knew about the iPod. And of course, when the iPhone came out, that was a different level as well.
I was just thinking about this because, as you said, because they were known as the iPod company in a lot of ways, that was my early days of consulting as well. And it felt like people would actually buy a Mac so that they could sync their iPod. They started to buy the Mac products so that they could work with their accessory products. Right. That started to happen little by little.
Call it the Halo. There you go, Jerry. Yes. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that I don't think the iPod itself out of the gate was a big hit. It only worked on FireWire 400, by the way. I had one. It was 5 gigs. And I used to use it. I won't even bring it up, but I used to teach some athletic classes. Sam and Joe know about this.
Oh, we know. Yeah.
And I would use it in those classes to serve up the music and hook it into the sound system. It was very effective to do that. And it was amazing. But at the same time, it didn't get a lot of traction. And one of the things that Pogue said in his book, he got a rare interview with Scott Forstall, who hasn't really talked to anyone since he left Apple. And one of the things that really gave the iPod traction was when Steve agreed to make it for Windows. And that was the inflection point where the iPod then started to experience that halo effect where people had such a great experience using the iPod that they wanted to get a Mac to even do more with it. So that was, and also they say that the gumdrop, for lack of a better word, the multicolored Macs put them back on the map. And that's really what escalated. Sales numbers for those gumdrop Macs were huge during the holiday season.
In high school, they had a iMac DV, digital video. That was a thing. And it was the iMac, like gumdrop style, but it was like this really cool slate gray color. It had a built-in FireWire 400 ports, I think 2 of them. And you could therefore connect a digital video camera. And there were certain cameras, I think Canon made some of the early ones that had a FireWire 400 port built in. And so you could have this whole video editing workflow right on your home computer for relatively low barrier to entry. That was one of my favorite things in high school, was being able to like make videos. And it was all based on a Mac, of course. My other favorite thing in high school was I had a radio show. Imagine that. Here I am doing a podcast for how many years has it been, guys? I don't know, almost 13. But my early experience with this was actually a high school radio station at my high school. Nothing Apple related in that world really, but the fact that I guess the lesson is like, it goes to show you that when technology can be presented to kids and integrated like that, it can lead to a lot of, it's like a natural way to encourage learning. Like, who wants to read a book when you can make a movie or get on the radio? That's an exciting way to learn. And Apple knew that in those early days. And again, for me, it goes right back to HyperCard. Not to go back to this topic, but Adam does confirm it's the same hyper as an HTML, right? Hypertext markup language. HyperTalk was the HyperCard programming language. Dwayne Moss also shared some more here in the chat that he got to meet Bill Atkinson when he picked him up at the Chicago airport when he came to talk to the local Mac user group there. So Bill Atkinson created HyperCard. These were the days when a single person could create an entire, this still happens, but like an entire app like that. And even including the interface, the design, the programming, everything from top to bottom. And then like millions of people went out and used it and built their own things from it. So He's a hero of mine, Bill Atkinson. What a cool story that he was able to create. He created like a ton of stuff, didn't he? Create like Mac Paint as well or something. Like
I remember
he was so prolific, that guy. Yeah, really impressive.
You mentioned making your own movie. That was such a powerful moment when Steve Jobs did the presentation talking about the digital hub. And once people saw that they could use iMovie and they could use iTunes, and they could incorporate the music, some of those keynotes, in terms of capturing people's imagination and wanting them, if they didn't have a Mac, wanting to go out and buy a new one or or associate themselves with a brand, just really pivotal moments. It sounds it's so easy. We pick up our phone and we could create a movie now and we can add music to it. But back then it was a little bit harder.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
Man, going forward in time, like I remember iDVD Studio Pro and making and editing things that way and building a disc out of it. And it was like super cool when you could do that.
It was really cool. You could make a menu, you pop the disc in and it gives you like this splash screen and like animated menu and choices. Do you want to play this video or this video? Just like a home DVD had. And you could do that, like you said, just in your home, on your home computer. And I helped clients with that in those early days. People loved the fact that they could do that and they felt very empowered that they were doing it, even if they needed a little help, like from people like us in those days.
It was my natural progression from when I was making mixtapes back in high school. That was like my biggest thing. And then going to something, I was making mixed movies, so to speak, on iDVD Studio Pro. So it brings back some good memories.
That's a good point too, is like CDR. You could do it with a CD. I've been with my wife now for about 20 years this year since we first got together. And one of the first gift I gave her was like a 3 CD set that I made of some of my favorite music. That was like a way that we could connect. And I made not only, you burn the discs, obviously, but using Photoshop to make like a cover and lay out all the tracks and things on there. And that was really fun. And like you said, it was tapes before that. You'd record like off the radio or something, or maybe you had a dual deck system. You could record from one tape to the other and make those mixtapes. Yeah, nice. And then you'd have the evolution to, CDR with like full quality. You could make it out of MP3s or AIFF or whatever.
Question is, how did you get those songs for CD? Well, options.
I probably owned a lot of those discs, honestly, and imported them into. That was the other really cool thing, is you stick a disc in your Mac and you import all the tracks right into iTunes, and it uses the Grace Note music database and finds the tracks, and it's
rip and burn.
Exactly. Yeah.
Before that, of course, there was Sound Jam before iTunes.
Yeah.
Which is what the company which Apple bought and became iTunes.
That's right.
Yeah, but we were all doing our burning. It was in the early days, you only could burn it. Remember, one time the speed. So if you had a 50-minute CDR, you had to sit there for 50 minutes and wait for it to complete. Right. And then it was always mind blowing that you could do it at 4 times or 6 times or 8 times the speed. Yeah. I remember we were doing a little bit of music, and I think this was probably around 1989 in New York City. And we did a recording and they had a CDR, and they said, we can make you one to take with you, but it would be $400 for that CDR.
Wow.
Just because they must have been thousands for this CDR burner back in the day.
Yeah.
Wow. I have a Christmas CD I used to make for the family. I have it with the Photoshop cover and everything. I should have thought to bring it in here as a show and tell. I had to go find it.
Does anybody remember the sound that would play when the disc was finished burning?
I remember the plutonium looking symbol.
Yeah, that was a cool one. Yep, exactly.
But a sound. You got it queued up or what?
Let me see. Is it?
Was that it?
I'm pretty sure it's the tritone sound. So if you go on your iPhone default alerts, your iPhone settings, sounds, default alerts, it's called tritone. I'm pretty sure that was the sound that iTunes made when the disc finished burning, which became the sound of a voicemail, I think. It was used on the first iPhone as a very common sound effect, and it started off as the disc burning sound. That's my recollection.
There was something similar, I think, when you plugged in your iPod or whatever, it made this sound that was the same exact sound that they used in Minority Report, the Tom Cruise movie.
Oh, really?
And I don't know which one happened first, to be honest with you, but it is the same. Like, I verified it online a while ago. It was the same exact sound. I just don't remember who took it from who.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. Here's another question. What is the first computer you bought for your business? Like when you started doing this for a living, do you remember your first computer?
Well, I remember my first adult computer, which I was just getting started. So it wasn't really my business yet. I was working in the field. It was an iBook G3 in the turquoise color with the handles and everything that you could. But that was the one, right? With you can
iBook
hold
G3. Yeah.
Toilet seat.
Toilet seat, clamshell. Yep.
Yeah, clamshell. And I remember because I bought it, I didn't have the money, so I bought it used on eBay from someone that had it for just a few months. So I got a little bit of a discount on it. But
nice.
I was so proud of that thing. I used to, carry that. It was the coolest thing I ever owned.
That was really cool. Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Jerry? What was your first professional Mac?
So we're talking for MacWorks, it was back in 2007. So it was a PowerBook G4, 15-inch. Yeah.
Same for me. Yep. Adam Rice says he's got the tangerine iBook right there. Yeah, those were great colors. I mean, people are comparing now with the Neo coming in these fancy colors. They're not as bright and as these were back in the day, the Bondi blue ones and the tangerine and whatever the colors were. They're a little bit more muted compared to those, but it is nice that Apple's experimenting more with color the last few years. Yeah, this was, Adam also brings up, this was a fun experience too. Was that the first Mac with Wi-Fi? And maybe I think that's why Adam's bringing this up, but the airport card. So these iBooks had the option for Wi-Fi. So imagine a laptop that did not have Wi-Fi built in. What is the point? Like, I'm carrying this computer around, like, I'm not going to connect to anything. I just have a computer with me. What these days, if you don't have internet, like, nobody sits down and opens their computer and just opens Word and starts writing. Okay, some writers do. But back then, like, the default laptop had no Wi-Fi and it was an option. And so I remember some of my first experiences were working for an Apple specialist. People would upgrade to Wi-Fi. Like, you'd add an airport card in these machines, or the airport would die and you'd have to replace it. Like, it was this little PCM card that goes under the keyboard. Adam points out that they demoed this Steve had to put a hula hoop around the iBook to prove that there were no wires. Like, it was a magic trick. It's amazing.
Yeah, and as Joe mentioned, to do the upgrade, the keyboard popped off of all things. And underneath, you had
two levers, right?
Exactly, and you'd stick the card in the slot. By the way, if anybody is listening and you've got any pictures you'd like to share, it doesn't have to be a video. Throw them in that folder and we'll put them up on the screen.
Yeah, pictures as well. Exactly. The Dropbox link is now in the chat here on the live stream as well. Yeah, and Dwayne says he used to install a lot of modems in Macintosh Duos. That's a good point. You could use a modem and you could dial out if you just have a phone line. You plug into the phone line and you could get online that way. Use one of your 1,000 free hours from AOL and you're off and running. So, yeah. Yeah, it's wild. Isn't it crazy, though, just to think about this evolution of how the state of the art back then was just having a computer at all, having a laptop at all was just an amazing thing. And again, with HyperCard, that quote unquote development environment was all self-contained. You're not calling frameworks online. You're not logging into an IDE that's tied into GitHub or something like that. You're just opening HyperCard and you're just coding from memory. Maybe you've got a book. I had some books you could look and see how to do things in a printed book. So yeah, you could be totally offline and still do really interesting things without just having the internet be an assumption that it's always there. Yeah, we've come a long way for sure. I don't know if it's an improvement or not, but here we are.
It depends on what you're talking about in terms of improvements, but
yeah.
I was just looking back at like in my photos library to see what I had too of my own. And it's funny because I have some older pictures, but I had my daughter helping me take apart MacBook Pros and putting hard drives in them and stuff. I don't have quite as old as I wanted, but now that I'm looking, I'm like, oh man, I remember that. And you start looking and going down memory lane.
Totally. Yeah. You just reminded me to look in my own photo library from that. I was at the Macworld when the iPhone was introduced, and they had, I think, 2 on display in these columns. They were plexiglass, so you couldn't get close to it. Like, you get close to it, but you couldn't touch the thing. You couldn't see it. But it was just pure magic to see this thing in person before it was like 6 months before it came out or whatever. Yeah, that was a really interesting time to be around in this world of Apple. My first Mac was also like Jerry, the PowerBook G4. Mine was the 12-inch PowerBook. What a great machine that was. Just compact form factor, really solid computer, just like my daily driver for years until I got the very first MacBook Air. I remember I was there also when Steve pulled it out of the manila envelope. It fit inside there. Didn't know there was a computer in there because it was like had that tapered design, and it was so thin. It used the 1.8-inch hard drive, which was really slow. That was the bottleneck in the whole thing. Or you could upgrade to an SSD for $500, and it was like all of 128 gigs or something, or maybe 64 gigs. You could get an SSD, but it was really expensive. But yeah, those were some really cool designs. Those two, I think, were two of my favorites of all time, probably.
Paul Thoreau is his name. He's a Windows PC specialist, and he did a show for years with Leo Laporte. And he had mentioned that he was going to be selling some of his stuff. And I was like one of the first to listen to the podcast. And I went to his website, and he had listed a PowerBook, just like you had, the 12-inch, Joe. And It was a very reasonable price. He sent it to me. I think he's up in Massachusetts. He sent it to me, purchased it from him through PayPal. And it arrived, and it had all the accessories. It was almost fresh out of the box. He barely even used it, barely touched it. So I used it as a side computer for a number of years. I agree with you. There was something really seductive and special about that 12-inch form factor of that particular machine, the PowerBook. I don't think any of the 13s really captured the personalization that you felt with the 12-inch. There was something really great about it. And I finally sold it for a fairly decent price on eBay because it exceeded its usefulness. But it was a special computer.
What about you, Sam? Do you have any favorites out there that you can think about, like some of your favorite Macs of all time?
I got to say that iBook, the clamshell, was actually, it had such an impact on me just when I took it out of the eBay box. But when I took it out, this is so freaking amazing. And I think of the years forward, and I had a PowerBook G4 as well, and I had other models along the way, but I don't think anything made as much of an impact on me as that one did because it was my first purchase on my own thing. Exactly. It wasn't like a business purchase. I spent my own money, what I had, to get that used model just to have my hands on an Apple product.
Totally. That's very meaningful when it's your own hard-earned money. Yeah. For sure. I have a couple of photos from those days. I don't even know what camera I would have had at the time, but you can see I'm sharing the photo of, again, as I described it, there's this like thick plexiglass column-shaped enclosure that had this lit little iPhone in it with a dock connector at the bottom, right? That was the dock connector back then. And I was playing some video loop, but it was mobbed. This was at Macworld. You can see some of the camera phones, as we called them back then, that are in the photo. Somebody's got a Razr flip phone. And there's a little, who makes that? Maybe Samsung back then.
Looked like a Nokia or something.
Maybe a Nokia, like candy bar style phone, as they called it. Taking these, I'm trying to remember. I probably had a Palm Trio at the time, and I might have I don't know if I carried around an actual digital camera. Yeah, Motorola. Someone said in the chat. So
you didn't take that with a quick take, Joe? The Apple.
Oh, no, that's a good reference, though. Good reference, the quick take. I used one of those also in high school, early days with digital, quote unquote, digital photography. Yeah. Wild times. Jerry, you said you got to one Macworld. That was the one and only that you had been to?
It didn't quite have any of the luster that you would imagine that you would have gotten it at some of these other Macworlds, or at least from what I imagine from reading Macworld magazine. It was pretty low key.
One of you guys shared an interesting photo here. So what is the backstory? Can you remind me of the backstory?
Yeah, this was at my house, by the way.
Yeah, Jerry, you must have brought this to Sam's house. This is probably the last time we saw you.
You used to have your Mac museum in your office.
That's right.
And Jerry, I had a party. You guys came, and Jerry brought you the Newton.
For the listeners at home, we're looking at a picture of young Joe here, clean-shaven Joe, holding a Newton. And I got this from a client who passed away, and I was hired, didn't know this client at all. I was hired to clean out the house and take all the objectionable material off of his computers because he was
objectionable material.
Yeah, he was a professor at Yale. He had something like a double professorship. And so I was hired by his mother. He had an untimely passing. And my job was to just parse through days and days of hard drives to just remove objectionable material.
Crazy.
And she said, anything you see here that you want. And the place was a mess. Wow. It wasn't dirty. It was cluttered. It was like a hoarding kind of scene without the dirt. And so this was just lying in on some desk somewhere. And I found a couple of the components. I think there was a case that came with it and a stylus.
Yeah. You had all the accessories there. Yep. That was very cool. Thank you again for that gift. I don't think I had ever used one of those before, but of course I remember reading about it in Wired magazine.
Neither had I. I had never touched one person either.
It was really cool. It was obviously way ahead of its time, as everybody knows, but the people who got into it, some people really got into it, and you could send data over like infrared and stuff, and you could add a PCM card for a dial-up connection or something. It could do all kinds of crazy stuff.
There's a whole community of people who work on these, and you can do a lot more these days with a Newton. You can't quite get it to where you need it to go. It can get on the internet, but you have to be really patient. But if you did find one of these, you could get it working again. And there's lots of people that support them. And this was one of John Scully's projects.
Yeah.
And this is one of the very first things that Steve Jobs killed once he became CEO. Yeah.
Totally.
Interim CEO, I should say.
The iCEO, exactly. Everything was I back then. As long as you're taking a trip down memory lane here, without context, do you guys have any guesses who this little boy is? So this was shared by Adam Rice, a friend of the show and supporter. This is an awesome photo. This is Adam many years ago. And this is, let's see, did he say using his Mac in 1987 or 88? He was 13 years old. Let's see, what Mac? That looks like, I had one of these in my Mac museum at one point. That's either the SE30 or maybe it was like a Mac Classic or something. What did they call it? What was the first Mac? Was it just called Macintosh? I'm sure I have these photos of us being really into computers in those early days. And it's no surprise we ended up in the profession that we're in, right, at this point.
Sure.
Yeah. Did you guys have people telling you? I remember my aunt, when I was probably that age, I was probably 13 or 14 or something, and my aunt was saying, you should do something with computers. So I was like rolling my eyes. What do I know about computers? Like, I don't know. I have a bunch of friends who are much smarter than I am and know way more than I do about computers. What do you mean do something with computers? Like scoffing as a sarcastic 13-year-old or whatever. And she was absolutely right. Like I did something with computers. I'm still doing it. So it's funny that sometimes people see you better than you can see yourself. But did you have what were your early influences like guiding you into this kind of field? Do you guys have any stories about that?
I'm curious about Jerry's because you came from a different profession. You want to share anything there, Jerry?
Yeah, sure. The tool and die business ran its course. When it started to fade was probably 2006, 2007. It was a lot more manufacturing was being done offshore. Initially, everybody thought everything would go to Mexico and the NAFTA treaty. And Ross Perot called it the giant sucking sound of all the manufacturing going to Mexico. But what really ate everybody's lunch was China back in those days, because it used to be like if you would get precision tooling from China, China could not manufacture the steel to the grade that we would get it here in the United States. And that quickly changed. And all of a sudden, China was eating everybody's lunch in the terms of the tooling and manufacturing. So there was rapid tooling going on. So in other words, let's say Apple needed a prototype, they would go to a local tooling shop and they would be able to create let's say a housing for a new product. But we're talking about for long-term production, it was just going offshore. So the business kind of ran its course. But during that time period, we had different types of computers. We had Macs and we had PCs, and we did networking. We had mentioned on another show how we had used the Farallon connectors and the phone net connectors to get these things integrated and basically doing these. They were called DNC dumps, direct numeric control dumps of data to these CNC machines. So it was post punch tape, post cards. By the way, you mentioned the punch cards.
Yeah.
When I was in grammar school, and some people listening, Dwayne probably remembers this. I grew up in Newtown, so I went to Sandy Hook School, which has obviously become very notorious.
Yeah.
And IBM had a big presence in Southbury, Connecticut. So that was very close to Newtown. And their dads would bring home these unused punch cards or used punch cards that they were throwing away. And we used to make these, like we would get out a stapler, you make a half circle by bending the punch card, you'd staple it, and you keep on working your way around. And you'd make this wreath out of punch cards.
Oh, sure.
And then you would spray paint it in gold or silver and put a bow on it. And those were our projects in first grade.
Oh, that's so cool.
yeah, so we would do all this D and C back to the shop. We would do all this stuff. And so the business was folding and I didn't know what I was going to do with myself. I was like, well, how old was I then? I was probably in my 40s, my early 40s. And I began to really love Macs at that point. So then I was buying Macs for myself and using them in music. And I would go on these servers. One was called Hotline. That would serve up illegal software, and I'd be downloading illegal software.
Some things never change.
The betas of Photoshop, and because Photoshop was passed around a lot. But then there was like this one website I went into, and I was getting release candidates, RCs or Golden Masters from Apple, whoever was sharing them out. So they would be coming out with like System 7, and I would download System 7 before it was released. And
some things never change. We're still on the cutting edge.
And this is before the days of preemptive multitasking. So you would be halfway into an install or doing a download of some gigantic thing on a dial-up modem, some gigantic installation of the Mac OS pre-release, and your computer would just lock up. And then you'd have to do a hard shutdown, a hard reboot, and start over again. It was the worst. So I was doing stuff like that. So I had an affinity for wanting to work with Macs. So not more than a street over, Adam Rice says, I ran a Hotline server in college for hip hop MP3s. That was such a great app. Yeah, Hotline was great. There were a number of them for music sharing. Most people remember Napster, but like Adam said, Hotwire was good, or Hotwire, LimeWire. Hotline. So not more than one street over in Woodbridge, Connecticut. It's a guy you met in your early days of your career, guys. I think you met him on a plane or going out to some Apple event. He was an Apple certified consultant. And he took me out one day. And I don't know what made me reach out to him or even think about doing this, but maybe I looked online about how to become somehow involved with Apple. And lo and behold, I don't think they had a consultant's locator. This guy was literally the next street over from where we were located, where the shop was located. And so he said, yeah, come out with me for the day. And so I went out. He was a great asset for me. And I said, what about certifications? He said, you don't need certifications. Just go out there and start doing it. But I did need a certification. And I believe I used Sam's company to take my first test to become support specialist on the very early days.
Did you take it at Danbury Airport at that spot?
I went to the place in Shelton, the testing center in Shelton. Yeah.
There was like a testing center at a local regional airport. You have a plane flying overhead and you go in and take your app.
Oh, that's funny. I'm trying to remember the guy's name from CompUSA who encouraged me along the same lines, although he said, join the Apple Consultants Network. Whereas your guy gave you advice of, don't worry about certification.
Don't worry about it. You don't need a stinking certification.
Yeah. That's wild. Wow.
But I felt like an imposter unless I had something. Yes. And I remember one of my earliest clients was this company. It was a design company, and they had an Xserve, and they had all the workstations logging remotely into the Xserve. And they hired me because they had problems, and I had no idea what I was doing.
Love those days.
That's a big job to just walk into, with no institutional knowledge there. But you mentioned him feeling like an imposter. Imposter syndrome is very real as a phenomenon. And I remember talking myself out of it. I'm like 10 years in, probably even more than that, and still getting those calls where I don't know if I'm going to be able to help this person. I haven't dealt with this one thing before, or what do I know? And imposter syndrome affects even, you could be doing this for 10 years and still suffer from that. But like you said, you get a certification or some kind of paper that says, at least you passed this test.
Yes.
You're not brand new.
Memorize real good.
Totally agree. And we have some more being shared here. And let's see. So I'll share this one from Dwayne again. This is a server room situation. I was actually going to ask this question and he answered it already. So you'll see in this image, picture of my server room in 2002. At the bottom right, my first question was, what the heck is that thing? In the bottom right of this photo, can't even describe it. It's basically a double wide, Power Mac G3 looking thing. This is the Apple Workgroup server. And it ran AIX. And I totally like AIX. I know I've heard this before, but I don't remember what that even was. So this is a very specialty piece of equipment from Apple, precursor to basically like you're describing, Jerry, the Xserve. Really interesting, like snapshot in time of some of the rooms we all probably walked into at one point in our consulting history. But this is, for the time, this would have been a pretty sophisticated setup.
Yeah, I've never seen that piece of equipment before. How about you, Sam?
No, I've not either. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, pretty amazing here. Here's another image that was shared.
You got the trash can Mac right below it if you saw it.
It's an actual trash can for those of you listening and not watching. Yeah, good point. It's exactly the same size as that. Hey, Power Mac, or what do you call it? Mac Pro. May it rest in peace, huh? That's probably not a shock that they discontinued that, but right on the cusp of their 50th anniversary, Apple doesn't make a Mac Pro anymore. Here's an image.
Are these also from Dwayne?
No, this one's mine, actually.
Yeah, I was wondering who shared this. You want to talk about this one, Sam?
But this was actually just a training center. I can't remember if it was down in Virginia or somewhere like that where I was doing a training. And then the very next room, a dusty, big room full of Mac equipment over the years. And I happened to snap this shot of an Apple II. And I can't read what that other guy is.
Yeah, that is an early, did they call it? I think it was a Macintosh Portable, right?
Maybe that was the name.
Is that what they called it? Someone mentioned this in the chat earlier. We didn't highlight it, but it had a lead acid battery in it. That was the battery technology of the time. And it probably could give you a good hour of runtime or something. But imagine carrying that honking beast around with you. With what is the screen? It's like a 8-inch screen or something like that. It's grayscale, or maybe it was just black and white. But
I think it was grayscale. Yeah, it's crazy.
Pretty wild.
So, yeah, it's not a CRT. It's a liquid crystal kind of thing.
Actually, it's a good point. That would have been a very early liquid crystal screen, you know.
Yeah, like an Etch-a-Sketch, man.
Yeah. What was that? There was a movie. Oh man, I watched this movie growing up, and it was something like it was like a Christmas movie, and the joke was that Santa made a portable record player for the kids that asked for it. I can't remember. I wish I could remember which movie this was, and it always reminded me of this, like the idea of a portable record player where you can't listen to a record while you're moving around because it's just
you can listen to Discman.
But yeah, exactly, a Discman. But remember it had the buffer because it would skip, so it had to actually read ahead and buffer with the Discman. But this Macintosh Portable always reminded me of this idea of a portable record player or something. It's like the technology is it's a mismatch. What technology exists versus what you actually want.
Yeah.
But people had them, and I guess it was a real thing. That's a pretty cool poster in the background too. The iMac banner there in the background.
Yeah, I took a few pictures of that room because it was fascinating to me. It was just like all of this stuff from history, and I have a poster of the next big and small things from Apple. It's a little blurry, but it has Yao Ming, the famous basketball player, and it has Mini-Me from Austin Powers showing the difference in the two different MacBooks. It's pretty funny, actually.
Apple's always been pretty clever with their advertising with that stuff. That's a good example of that. And then here's another one from Dwayne, just like an old server room, which is comprised of, what are those? The graphite Power Mac G4. How about the mirror drive door machine? When was the last time you heard somebody say mirrored drive door?
Yeah.
That was a G4 also.
That was a G4, yes.
In this photo, both G4s, yep. But yeah, like two of them are laying on their side there. It's, this stuff brings back memories. Used to see all this stuff.
That was the problem. It was the painful move to the G5 that processor just boxed Apple in. It was the final nails in the coffin. And then this whole move to Intel was such a surprise for everybody. You want to talk about just getting the doors blown off in terms of its announcement.
Yeah, totally. This is a good maybe transition point here. We're going to keep recording. I'll tease a couple of things. So Jerry just brought up this concept of moving from IBM PowerPC architecture to Intel. We then went through a transition from Intel, obviously, to Apple Silicon. And we're in that same parallel phase here. I also want to tease a prompt here for the second half of the show. What is the first keyboard shortcut that you guys learned? And I have a good answer for this one. So when part 2 airs, you will hear the answer to those questions and more. Thank everybody for listening to part 1 of our special focus on Apple's 50th anniversary. And we hope you'll continue listening and check out part 2 coming soon. Special thanks to the following community members whose strong monthly support has sustained us for all these years. Ryan Gowdy, CoreCompetent.com. Weldon Dodd, Kanji.io. Richard Wingfield, EnvisionDesign.net. Adam Rice, AskAdam.io. Mac Admins Podcast, podcast.macadmins.org. Tim Nyberg, themacguys.com. Michael Thompson, origin84.com. Matthew Waples, waples.net. Tom Puls, boxit.tech. Jerome Potters, pitpro.nl. Steve Sorbo, macsos.biz. Andy Espo, callandy.com. And Nate Sinal, weareascout.com. Thank you all very much, and thanks to our patrons at every level of support. If you enjoy the show, we really would love your support. And if you already support us and can increase your monthly pledge, we really do find that encouraging. commandcontrolpower.com and click support. Thanks very much for listening and for supporting the show.
Jerry does his voices of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his deeply detailed yarns all the time.
I have a whole story about this.
Sam is on the road again, phoning in from a hotel.
At least we know where I am.
Half a century combined of Apple expertise right now. Right now. My Mac is slow